Testing. Testing 1, 2. Do you hear it?
Yeah.
Okay. What's that?
That's lockout. That's that time thing.
Oh, it's good it happened now.
but I think you just hit the button up here, isn't it?
I didn't touch anything up there. I didn't pause it.
Right here. Isn't this your video splitter right here?
Okay. Well, let's see.
Yeah.
We could shut that computer off, wouldn't that help? This one here. Then it shouldn't switch, right?
It still may.
Test. Test. Test.
You know how to properly shut down a computer?
Yeah, just hold the button. This is what I get from IT.
Well, we can move this up out of the way too, so that you set that down there if
There,
you want.
it's off. Well, I thought it was off. I think it rebooted.
Oh my lord.
Take care.
Do you want to test the clicker yet?
There. Remind me of putting it back in. After we're done. Yep, your clicker works.
Wait.
Okay, thanks. Okay.
Anything else?
No, I'm good. Thank you.
Have a nice day.
Thank you. You too.
We're gonna see how much, you're looking at the
What's that? Oh.
camera, we're gonna see how much it blend in.
Oh.
I'm gonna go
Do you want me to go up there? Or?
I'm gonna walk across.
Okay. Okay.
I know I'm not.
Good idea. isn't. There's this, but then they wouldn't be able to see.
I can talk loud.
You might have to talk loud, Jane Arnold.
Yeah. I just wanted to make sure that they were able to. Do I need to get up on the stage?
Yeah, you do, Jane Arnold.
All right.
Back here, but I don't.
We'll let Julie sit down. Lucinda, Tim. Yeah. We'll call them out if they're late. And the offsites, right? Offsites too. They might not be able to hear you. Okay. But I don't have a microphone, but our speaker does. So welcome. There's a lot of you here, and I want to do a call out to our teammates in food and nutrition. They've done a great job with the box lunches, and hopefully this was a little bit more convenient for everybody this year than going through a line. So great call with HR on that. I have the privilege to be able to introduce the speaker for your noon entertainment, as well as she will be at the employee recognition banquet this evening. So I'm going to read a little bit of information. She said I could say whatever I wanted, but I think I'll just keep this script. So our speaker today knows that you have the power to transform lives. She is a devoted advocate for both patient and provider, a leading educator for the power of compassionate care, and a passionate voice for preventing and alleviating burnout in medical professionals. Her rare history makes her uniquely qualified to speak to healthcare providers today. As the daughter of a nurse and a surgeon, Allison grew up immersed in the field of medicine. From the age of 6, she shadowed her father on his rounds as he visited his surgical patients at hospitals. She fondly remembers witnessing her father's consistent, warm, and compassionate care, and was inspired to work and intern in hospitals and medical office settings. Then at the age of 32, her life was turned upside down by a tragic event that caused her to spend collectively over 400 days in physical therapy centers, hospitals, and doctors' offices as a patient. Allison's story is more than just one of survival. It is a story of resilience, courage, and rigorous pursuit of hope. It is a story of collaboration among teams of medical personnel and how their kindness, determination, and compassion changed her life and built a foundation for healing. As you listen today, please keep in mind that Allison is also an award-winning visual artist. All of her artwork in this presentation was made by her. I'm assuming this is one of them? Okay. In fact, her work is in the permanent collection of the Museum of Fine Arts in St. Petersburg, Florida. Prepare to be delightfully surprised, profoundly moved, and keenly inspired. Please join me in welcoming Allison Massari.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Imagine 1996 in New York City. I was a reclusive artist, and I came home one day to an intriguing voicemail. The Russian voice said, "Natasha, you must be prepared to meet your team of operatives at midnight tonight at the Brooklyn Bridge. I will send you precise meeting coordinates and encrypted code." That was my father. And for 2 years, we'd been enthusiastically playing this elaborate game pretending to be Russian secret agents. We were always trying to impress each other with clever spy talk. Now, as you heard, my alias was Natasha. I imagined myself with long black hair and high black boots. Very dangerous. Meet Boris. Isn't he adorable? His real name is Frank, and he's 100% Italian, by the way, no Russian. Now, of course, when I visited back home in Florida, we acted like normal people. And as I walked out the door to leave, Dad transformed. "Natasha, be very careful when you start your car." "But Father, you should know better. I have a team of highly trained operatives outside surveying the house. You have nothing to fear." You see, I wasn't just dangerous. I was the agent who frequently saved the world from impending doom. But then came the moment all the laughter stopped. One night, I was driving home alone from a movie when suddenly I was stunned by a massive impact, deafening sounds of screeching metal. I was in a horrific high-speed crash, trapped inside my car, consumed in fire, and nearly burned to death. My vinyl seat was on fire, melting onto my back. My flesh burned down to the bone on my right shoulder. I was conscious the entire time as I was being skinned alive. Now, despite being devoured by that excruciating pain, I was shocked to see that the anguish of my loneliness was more potent than the physical agony of burning. Thank you. I wanted someone with me to understand what was happening. And I just kept thinking, I don't want to die alone. I felt so alone, and I was astonished by it. But what this tells me is just how much we human beings need each other. We need each other. I'd never known the depth of this truth until I lived it in that fire. Now, the flames were shooting 20 feet above the car. A wall of fire from a trail of gasoline extended 20 yards back. Earlier that day, I had picked up art supplies. Everything was still in the back seat. Gallons of turpentine were exploding. And although I couldn't see them, I heard later that there were about a dozen people at the scene just staring in disbelief at this massive inferno. A witness found me later. He said, "Allison, we were all watching, paralyzed." He said, "I wanted so badly to do something to come get you, but I was getting married the next day." He had tears running down his face as he spoke to me. He said, I was on my way to get my bride for our rehearsal dinner, and I knew if I did nothing and you died, I'd never be able to live with myself. He said, but then, thank God, suddenly out of nowhere, a man appeared, and he began walking swiftly and without hesitation towards your car. He said it was the most incredible thing he'd ever seen. He said the man was pumping his arms, that it was like watching the Terminator. He said it's like he was superhuman, and that man walked through the wall of fire. Now, of course, I had no idea any of that was happening. I tried to get out, but my door was jammed shut. Smoke had saturated my lungs. I was just starting to black out, and I thought, I can't believe I'm about to take my last breath. But then all of a sudden, I saw movement to my left, and there was this face inches away from me, looking at me through my driver's side window. This man looked into my eyes, and there was an instant bond. I was burning alive, and yet overcome with incredible relief. I didn't think for a second he could get me out. I just thought, I can't believe I'm not going to die alone. But then he yelled, "Get your head down!" I had to move my head quickly and more into the fire. But in one kick, he shattered all the glass. I came flying out of the car. He patted out the flames on my body with his bare hands. And then he dragged me on my back away from the fire. I felt the dirt, gravel, and glass under me. Tires were exploding. And when he pulled me far enough away, I fell back into his arms and rested. Sometimes all it takes is one person to change a life. One moment, one look. You never know the impact you can have in someone else's life. Now, the next thing I knew, I was face down on the ground in the dirt. There were police and firefighters all around. A helicopter was landing, and the noise added to this incredible chaos. The paramedics had to cut all the clothes off of my body, whatever hadn't burned off already. They were in an urgent rush to get me to the burn unit. And then I overheard one of them say, "We need to flip her over now to get her on the gurney." I was mortified. I did not want to be flipped over naked in front of a crowd of people. Here I was in a dire situation. I'd almost burned to death. You'd think I wouldn't have cared, but I did. I was still me. I was struggling to speak, but my lungs were so filled with smoke I couldn't get any words out, and of course I couldn't move. And then all of a sudden, one of the firemen yelled, "Wait! He stopped everybody and he leaned down to me so close. Somehow he'd seen that I was struggling. He said, "Hey, what's happening? What do you need?" And then he pressed his ear close so that I could whisper to him what I was afraid of. He paused. He stood up in the middle of all the noise and yelled out to the men, "I need one of your coats." And then they covered me in a fireman's coat and flipped me over. Here they were in an intense situation, but they took the extra few seconds to give me my dignity. I felt so grateful to that fireman who noticed I was distressed. Rather than rush to handle the task, he had the presence of mind to see and treat me as a human being. I felt so cared for and seen and heard. And the next thing I knew, I was being airlifted to the hospital burn unit. And since they didn't know if I had a spinal cord injury, I couldn't be given any pain meds, not even one aspirin, while we waited 24 hours for an MRI result to come in. It was during that time that I was debrided for the first time. And a doctor came in the room and also explained that somehow in the accident, my scalp had come off the top of my head. I remember her so tenderly explaining to me what she needed to do. And then with a big staple gun in one hand, she put her other hand on my shoulder, looked into my eyes so sweetly. She said, "Are you ready?" I said, "Yes." And with so much love in her hand, she stapled my scalp down to my skull. Without question, her kindness made it easier. I was calm. The fact that she took those extra few seconds to show this genuine caring made this torturous experience more bearable. And she was the one who came to me the next day and said, "Allison, you're going in for a major skin graft surgery." And I did. For weeks in the hospital, my family never left my side. Their compassion was endless. My sister later held my hand. She said, "Allison, you were so bloody and swollen, we couldn't recognize you." The doctor said 50% of my body had second and third degree burns. I was in such shocking, relentless pain, I couldn't sleep more than a few minutes at a time. My entire reality wasn't about how am I going to get through the next day or how am I going to get through the next hour. I was literally saying, how am I going to get through the next second? I felt so deeply betrayed by life. My face was so swollen I couldn't open my eyes. One morning I heard the shuffling of feet entering the room and a familiar voice. "Natasha, it appears that the enemy has made yet another failed attempt to neutralize you." My dad. For the first time in weeks, I smiled. In an instant, I went from feeling devastated to feeling powerful. I was thrust into my character of Natasha, feeling as if I just saved the world. I actually felt proud, laying there all bloody and swollen. I felt cool. Amazing. And as Boris would say, it is the power of the mind. Now, of course, those good feelings only lasted a few minutes. It took years to master the healing of emotional, physical, and spiritual pain. I experienced extreme depression, despair, anxiety, years of grueling physical therapy. This profound journey took me on my greatest adventure, searching to harness peace and happiness in spite of my suffering. You know, as human beings, we have a natural instinct. As human beings, we tend to look for pleasure through the body. The adrenaline rush of snowboarding, a kiss, a mouth-watering chocolate, a vodka, a cigar. But these are all fleeting moments. Or we find happiness by falling in love, being successful at work, painting. These pleasures are wonderful, and yet they are dependent upon something external. If this is how we approach happiness, we will be forever yearning. something deeper is available to us. A resounding sense of peace, a quieter kind of happiness that's self-generating, an endless current from within. The question is, how do we really get there and stay there? Think about it. How many of us grew up with the idea, one day I will be happy. Any sadness and disappointment will be a thing of the past. But pain will always be a part of our lives. When a loved one dies, fear that we won't make it in the world, when we feel rejected, and then there is that longing to be loved. The German poet Goethe wrote about this pain of life in the most extraordinary way. He used an expression that describes the experience of pure, exuberant joy and the deepest emotional devastation coexisting within a person at the same time. Himmelhoch jauchzend, zum Tode betrübt. Himmelhoch jauchzend is heaven, ecstasy. Zum Tode betrübt, deadly anguish. Goethe acknowledges that happiness is possible in the midst of suffering, that pain and joy exist side by side. Embracing this idea is an essential foundation for building a peaceful life. Imagine if you have a mountain of all of your pain here in one hand, and your joy is over here in the other. Even if it's the smallest thing, you focus on that joy, you build it, you grow it, you nourish it so much that eventually your joy towers over your pain. My comrades, this is one of my greatest secrets to happiness. Now, of course, none of us want to feel pain. It's natural to push it away or try to find ways to ignore it. However, there are moments in all of our lives when we're forced to confront it. On the burn unit, nurses had to scrub my body with what felt like wire brushes to get the dirt, gravel, and glass out that was embedded in my flesh. My fever was so high, doctors worried about seizures, brain damage, and kidney failure. My mother counted more than 300 staples in my back alone. The torment was inescapable. I said to her, "Mom, why aren't they giving me any pain meds?" She said, "Honey, you're on the maximum dosage of morphine." I remember thinking, I just want a 2-minute break, just 2 minutes. But it was about that time my surgeon came in the room. He said, "Oh, Allison, I'm so sorry. The surgery didn't work. None of the skin grafts took except for one tiny spot on your right elbow. We have to do the whole thing over again." Sometimes in life, there is no break. There is no quick fix. What you do is you dig deep and survive it. Now, alongside that steadfast resolve that I learned was the power and devotion of family and friends reaching out to me with the most unbridled generosity, supporting me, fortifying me, accompanying me on my journey. When something tragic happens, we have such an opportunity to come together and pour so much love and compassion into the situation, to restore goodness, to bring back healing and hope. I was so fortunate to be on the receiving end of that from so many people. Do you know, in the hospital at one point, people lined up in the hall. They weren't allowed in my room at first, but I knew they were there. I'll never forget how I felt every time I opened a card from someone, with every visitor who brought me food, with every sweet smile from a stranger. Everything we do makes a difference. Every act of kindness counts. And oh, do I remember the kindness of my nurses. They seemed understaffed on that burn unit, sometimes so busy running from room to room, changing bandages, checking IVs, and still there were so many times they would stop without saying a word just to hold my hand. those memories have never left me. I still see it and feel it. I often reflect on the fact that I was too drained and weak to say a single word to them. They still have no idea truly just how much those moments helped me. You all do have such an awesome responsibility to help people heal. And I'm sure there have been many times you went the extra mile for someone and no one said, thank you. Maybe like me, they were too sick, too distracted, too much in pain. Or perhaps they were that difficult patient or family or colleague. But you showed up and you gave anyway. On behalf of all of those people, I say thank you. It's important for me to say here too that to me, compassionate care isn't just about being kind. Being an expert at your job is compassionate care. Being fully present with your tasks or triple checking your work is compassionate care. Being really skilled at putting an IV in well is compassionate care. Being up to date on the most effective delivery of treatments that minimize pain and discomfort is compassionate care. Keeping your organization financially healthy so that everyone can continue to be there for the patient is compassionate care. Let's get back, though, to the topic of kindness and how it relates to all of this. We cannot underestimate what our kindness and care does for those around us. And it doesn't have to take extra time like we may think. I know in today's hectic world, it is so easy to feel so stretched sometimes that maybe it feels like there isn't time to bring kindness in those brief interactions we have with family, friends, patients, colleagues, but we can. We can learn to master the art of bringing our love and kindness to someone in the blink of an eye in 3 seconds with a genuine smile, a supportive hand on someone's back, or maybe it's the attention you bring to the sound of your voice or the look in your eyes, holding someone's hand so they know they're not alone. A simple expression of love. And it doesn't have to be about saying the right words. I'll give you a great example. I remember being on the burn unit one day. I wasn't aware of anyone in the room, and I was overcome in a moment of extreme despair and physical pain. I was deep inside myself. I thought I was totally alone, and then all of a sudden a nurse leaned over the bed above me, so close to my face, and she looked into my eyes with the most incredible sweetness. And then she put her hands on my head and ran her fingers through my hair. And again, she never took her gaze off of me, and her love washed over me, and I felt healed. It was a 7-second interaction, and I will never forget her. You are the healers of the world. Whether you are directly working with a patient or behind the scenes, on the leadership side and management in the lab and imaging and education on the finance side, this is who you are. This is how I see you. Anyone who eases pain is a healer. Anyone who supports someone else to ease pain is a healer. Anyone who can bring love and kindness in the midst of tragedy is a healer. Anyone who can transform a person's painful moment into a moment of feeling comforted and cared for is a healer. Every single thing you do on behalf of another person's well-being counts. It matters. It's never a small act. The world of medicine, the science and technology of it takes people so far. And still, there's a vital need for the human connection, for your presence. If you take just one thing from me today, let it be that compassion heals the places that medicine cannot touch. You are healing the places that medicine cannot touch. Now, as time passed in that hospital room, and I was slowly able to start to move beyond all those raw feelings of the surgery, skin grafts, and debridement, I began to ask everybody to find the man who saved me. I had to meet him. I found out that his name was Roger Pepper, and I'll never forget the day he came to visit me. He showed up with an extra large cheese pizza and 2 strawberry milkshakes. It was very cute. But remember now, on the night we met, we were surrounded by fire. There were flames whipping around us, and he was tall, 6'2", and fierce and powerful as he saved me. So that's who I was expecting. But when he showed up in my hospital room, he sat so humbly in the chair in front of me, so modest, so benevolent. I stared at him in awe. I kept thanking him. I remember him saying, "Allison, I went to Vietnam. I'd seen many gory scenes there. I knew exactly what I was walking into, and I couldn't believe you were alive." Do you know, every single time I tried to say, "Roger, you saved my life," he'd stop me. He'd say, "No, Allison, it was you who saved me." Roger explained. He said, "Allison, 6 months ago, my wife, the love of my life, died from cancer. We adored each other. No one has ever loved me so unconditionally, and my heartache was unbearable." He explained that after his wife's death, he lost all motivation for his life, left his entire career in marketing, and became a security guard just to pay the bills. He said, "Allison, it was during that time that I began to reflect on my entire life." He said, "Allison, I was not a nice person. I had wronged so many people." And he shared very openly that he'd gone into such terrible shame and regret over this, that he'd lost his will to live. And that's what it took to walk into that fire. What amazes me is that 2 people in their deepest moment of pain met in the middle of a blazing fire and saved each other. But it gets even more interesting. He said, "Allison, do you realize I shouldn't have even been there that night? I've never even been to that town where your accident was." He said that on that fateful night, he was sitting home alone on his sofa, nothing on the TV, and he thought on a whim, you know, there's going to be that new guy starting at my company tonight. He's going to be at that guardhouse far away, but I think I'll go visit him. He insisted this is something he normally didn't do, but nevertheless, he got in his car and began this very long drive. Nearly 1 hour later, he pulled up to that guardhouse and saw my car bursting in flames directly in front of that guardhouse. When the firemen arrived later, they said if he had hesitated even 3 seconds, I'd be dead. Roger always said he felt he was born for that moment. And of course, I never stopped thanking him for saving my life. His story is such a beautiful one of redemption and healing. Roger went on to fall in love again, rebuilt his whole career in marketing, and ended up bringing so much happiness to everyone around him. I adored this man. Now, unfortunately, he did pass away from a stroke a number of years ago, but for years, he would call me every few months just to check on me. And he'd always say in his southern drawl, "Allison, I went to pull you out of that car that night, but I'll never stop pulling you up. I'll never stop." He knew I was suffering for a long time. Roger was always so sensitive to that part of my journey. He understood depression and despair. Now, so far today, I've talked about tragedy, right? But what about the everyday emotional challenges of just being human? The helplessness of witnessing suffering in the world, the sting of our own self-judgment, the times when we all have moments of fear or loneliness. What I have found is that the places inside of us that are wounded and in pain are the most in need of our love. The truth is, we cannot acquire a deep sense of peace and lasting happiness unless we're willing to address our own suffering. Instead of resisting our own pain, we can pour our love and compassion into it. Once we stop judging our own faults, our own suffering, the mind becomes quieter and we create space for happiness to come in, for goodness to come in, for peace to come in. It takes courage to look at our own pain. But what I have seen time and time again is that in order to be truly happy, we must be very brave. Now, after 40 days on the burn unit, I went home. It was about 2 months later that I looked down at myself and I truly saw the severity of my condition. My body was changing dramatically. I didn't recognize myself. I didn't look human. My wounds were deep blood red and bulging into these large lava-like shapes. I was convinced I'd been assigned to a diminished life, that I would always be on the fringe of society. Going out into the world was almost intolerable. Although there were so many loving people, there were some who were not kind at all. I have countless stories of the pain of being judged by others, which ultimately and ironically helped me to learn compassion for difficult people. What I saw in this is that forgiveness and understanding are truly the only balm for the wounds of unkindness. One exceptionally difficult experience helped me to see this. After that 40 days on the burn unit when I'd gone home, it was just 1 week later that I woke up one morning to find all the wounds on my entire body mysteriously covered in hundreds of blisters. We called my surgeon immediately. You know, it looked like a very extreme situation to us, so he said, whatever you do, don't touch it. Don't put on any normal clothes. Just put on your hospital gown, open, loose in the back, a short, loose pair of shorts. Just get to the outpatient waiting area. I'll meet you there. Just get here right away. The concern we had was, of course, perhaps the skin grafts were coming off of my body, and a third surgery might be required, which would have risked my life again. We drove in silence to the hospital. I wasn't thinking of it at the time, but this was my first time out in public since my accident. I was sitting in a chair in the outpatient waiting area. My dad left to go park the car, and my mom left to go to a reception desk so they could call the doctor to let him know we were there. And the waiting room was very crowded. There were about 30 to 40 people there. And all of a sudden, a hospital employee rushed up from behind me and began to yell, "You, how dare you?" Her scathing tone stunned me, but I had no doubt she was talking to me. I turned around as she continued to yell, "You're freaking all these people out. You should have covered that up." Of course, I immediately tried to explain my doctor's instructions, but she refused to listen. And the scene she made was humiliating. You know, up to that moment, I'd been consumed with mere survival. This was so early on, and there was a disconnect. I hadn't even processed the idea yet that seeing my body was frightening. You know, I was in denial. I didn't get it yet. And you know, there are no mirrors on burn units. She grabbed my arm, aggressively marched me out of the waiting room, down a hall, and turned and said in a scolding tone, "You have no right to go out in public." Put me in a cold, sterile white room, walked out, and slammed the door when she left. I began sobbing. People's words are so powerful. And sometimes all it takes is one moment, one comment, one misunderstanding. Now, over the years out in the world, there were a significant number of heartbreaking events like this. The judgments came from every education level, every socioeconomic level. I was desperate to understand why this was happening. I didn't want to be held hostage by my anger or my hurt feelings. So I finally decided that I was going to start more closely observing people's reactions to me, to detach a bit, so perhaps I could start to learn what was really happening for them. And what I started to see over time, again and again, is that the only reason people behave mean is because they're acting out of their own pain and their own fear. When people are in pain, they lash out. It's almost like people have a cellular response to seeing something that frightens them, like a knee-jerk reaction of fear and survival. And in some cases, I would look at the person, it was almost like they were thinking, if this could happen to her, could it happen to me? And that fear seemed to just systematically shut them down to me and create judgment. So I asked myself one day, what if I could have compassion? Can I forgive someone for banning me from a public place? Can I learn to feel loving when no one is coming to say they're sorry? Believe me, I had to revisit these questions for years. I knew I was in agony holding on to my hurt feelings. But finally, I let go. I did it for them, and I did it for myself. I wanted to feel peaceful. And what I found is that love is the answer. Always. So what does love look like in conflict? Everyday kind of conflict. I learned something remarkable about this from the martial art Aikido. Traditional Aikido teaches that when attacked, you do not attack back. Instead, you redirect the force from your opponent to neutralize the charge, to restore their dignity. The intention is to create peace and protect everyone from injury, including the attacker. I know sometimes it feels impossible to generate that kind of graciousness when we feel wronged. And surely every single one of us in this room has had someone in our lives, if not many, who have pushed us to our limits, whether it's a friend, a patient, a family member, a colleague, and we work so hard in those moments. Every time I'm challenged, I go deep inside myself and I repeat these words quietly in my mind to myself. I will forever be ready to be kind. I want to be a place of nourishment. Even if I'm in pain, I'm determined to find a way to forgive. Even if I feel betrayed, I will love. We have to be warriors for love. And that's when I finally got it. The world doesn't change. We change. And that is another great secret to happiness. This path to well-being and feeling good is not easy. It's a lifelong mission for all of us. And for me, even after years passed, I had days where I was heartbroken. I'd think, half of my body is covered in reptilian-like skin. Will I ever feel okay? But I didn't want to keep waiting to experience joy until my emotional and physical wounds were going to go away. The scars were never going away. So one day I asked myself, well, what if I could be happy anyway? What would that look like? So I just started by imagining myself smiling and laughing. The truth is, there comes a point, not early on, but there comes a point when we can learn to feel good even while we're struggling. How? By intentionally making that choice to build joy alongside the pain. Himmelhoch jauchzend zum Tode betrübt. Always remember to think of the good in your life. Think of that kind soul who smiled at you when you crossed the street the other day. That person at work or in your family who supports you behind the scenes. The incredible pleasure of eating macaroni and cheese. Or it may be as simple as remembering that you have eyes to see, ears to hear, legs to walk, arms to give hugs. When we remember to think of the good, to search for the good, we're more likely to experience the good things happening around us, and it can help us feel just a little bit better. Now, as my recovery continued, I know that everyone in this room would understand there was an enormous amount of scar tissue that began to develop everywhere in my body. I'd been burned. My scars were severely contracting. It was so thick and dense that my right arm eventually contracted all the way down here, stuck to my side. I literally couldn't raise this right arm more than 3 inches from my hip. I didn't want to live like that. I went to every single physical therapist I could find, but everyone kept giving me the same answer. Allison, I'm so sorry. There's nothing we can do. My doctors didn't give me any other options than physical therapy, so of course I sought out the best people I could find. I went from place to place. At one point I had photos taken and my file copied and sent across the country, but I kept getting the same answer. I'm so sorry. But I persisted, and I waited, and I persisted. And finally, one day the phone rang. It was a physical therapist out of Vail, Colorado, all the way across the country, a very young woman right out of her graduate program, and she said, I studied your file and the photos. If you're willing to do the work, I think I can get you your arm back. So I moved to Colorado. Every single day, my physical therapist, Tracy, would lay me down on a medical table, and with all of her weight, she would shove my shoulder blade into place to keep it where it needed to be to protect it, while she had a male therapist at the end of the table pulling my arm up and over my body with all of his strength. You see, what Tracy had seen in those photos in the medical records was that over a year later, still, there was a teeny tiny little wound under my arm on the edge of my armpit here that would never close over and heal, no matter what the doctors tried. But she decided this was a gift. She decided we were going to physically tear open that little wound under my arm. Every day they would pull and pull. It would bleed every time. It hurt, but I didn't care. I wanted my arm back. We made progress every day, a quarter of an inch at a time, until my arm eventually healed totally upright. And today I have my arm back 100%. Never give up. Chutzpah, feistiness, courage, determination. This is what life requires of us. Being gentle and loving by itself was not enough to save me when I felt like life knocked me down again and again. What also saved me was guts. And I found out you can be tender-hearted and fierce. And I experienced a strength within myself I'd never known. I learned that I have to be 100% fully in charge of my life, that I'm driving my life. I learned to wake up every day and say, I'm taking charge from the tips of my toenails to the top of my head with every ounce of my willingness and my ability. When we can learn how to stop resisting our challenges and instead learn to embrace them, something is born in us that is so much better, so much more powerful, so much stronger than we ever thought possible. We are all so much stronger than we have any idea. We are all capable of overcoming incredible trials, of reaching places deep inside ourselves we never imagined. There's a reservoir of strength and courage within each of us. The idea is to remember it, to remind ourselves every day that it exists, to use it, to enjoy it. Life has shown me that no matter how hard it gets, never give up on yourself, never give up on other people. Reach out, let people in. Listen, every day I thank God for my life. And every day I say yes to life. I'm a yes, I'm all in. I always ask myself, what if this was my last day on earth? Literally every morning. What if I were to die tomorrow? Not in a morbid way, but in a wonderful way. When I have a nice thought about someone, I don't wait. I tell them. When I see my family, I swoop them up. I hug them. I tell them I love them. I want to know, did I love? Was I total? I know every day I have a chance to do good in this world, and I'm going to want to know when I die one day that I lived wholeheartedly. Early in my life, it was my very sweet grandmother that taught me everything I needed to know about living wholeheartedly. And this next story is a little one I've written down. I really wanted to read this to you today because it so beautifully underscores the incredible power that you all have when honoring family inside of this sacred space of healthcare. It was evident to me that my grandmother knew how to make every minute count in life. As a small child, I was especially close to her. We were always making things. We would make cinnamon rolls together from scratch in her kitchen. We'd go for long walks and pick blackberries, and then we made pie. She would let me roll out the crust with her big wooden rolling pin. She taught me to needlepoint and knit for hours on end. She and my grandfather had this remote cabin by a lake in Hiawassee, Georgia that Grandpa built. And sometimes I'd get to spend summers there, and Grandma and I would take art classes together. She had this massive garden. She grew all of her own food, and we'd go out and pick zucchini and snap peas and green beans and watermelon. She didn't talk much. She didn't need to. I always felt deeply loved by her. It was 20 years later, while I was living in New York City, that I got a call from my father. He said, "Allison, your grandma's extremely ill. You need to come quickly. She's most likely not going to make it through the night." In that moment, my world shook. The reality of losing her, this anchor in my life, who I loved so much, devastated me. In tears, I packed my bag. I was out the door in 10 minutes, rushing to the airport, desperate to get to her. I arrived in Florida at the nursing home that evening, just in time. My whole family was there in the room with Grandma. Everyone was so sad and exhausted. They'd not slept much. And after hugs with each of them, my father quietly pulled me aside. He said, "Honey, do you think you might be able to stay here with your grandma through the night? You could have some time alone with her, and the rest of us could get some sleep." With a gasp, I said yes. It felt miraculous to be given this time with her. So when my family left, I crawled into my grandmother's big bed with her. I looked into her eyes. No words needed to be spoken. I wrapped my arms around her, and we fell asleep together. It was hours later that I awoke from a deep sleep, feeling the gentle touch of someone's hands on my arm. As I slowly cracked open my eyes, I saw something that took my breath away. Soft light was just starting to fill the room. The sun had not yet come up, and I saw what at first glance looked like angels surrounding our bed. There were 4 nurses with their arms outstretched, holding the bed rails. At first, it looked like they were holding hands. They were leaning in and looking so lovingly as I cradled my grandmother in my arms. Clearly, they'd been standing there for some time with such incredible sweetness, and in complete silence, I felt they were honoring us. Without words, they were letting me know they had witnessed the special love that my grandmother and I shared. It was later that day, with our whole family around her and while I was holding her, that my grandmother passed away. Losing her, of course, was heartbreaking. Yet, when I look back and think about my grandmother's death, it's not agony or loss that I remember. It is that stunning moment those 4 beautiful nurses gave to me as they encircled me and my grandmother. A moment of recognition, love, kindness. That moment was a gift. Usually, looking back at our moments of pain, it's not easy to see any gift. We have to actively participate in finding something good in every difficult situation. Very often we have to work at it and say on purpose, "I will find something good in this." It is so important in life to reframe our negative memories. Like the story of my grandmother, the memory I have of those nurses quite literally reframed her death into something beautiful. We all have the ability to anchor our painful moments into something that symbolizes the light coming in. I know sometimes it seems impossible. It is possible. In my worst moment, burning alive in a car, The goodness I now can remember is that very second I caught eyes with a man who saved my life just before he kicked the glass in. It was incredible. We bonded in that instant. What I remember now, what I choose to remember, is that heart-lifting relief I felt knowing someone was reaching out to me and I wasn't going to die alone. And on the burn unit, when I was being debrided 4 hours a day in mind-bending pain, I now look back and think about the powerful devotion of my family who stood by me, the steadfast support of my nurses and doctors, these unwavering examples of humanity, connection, love. Even in my darkest hours, it is always the light of the human spirit that awakens me to hope. And that is what I think about, and that is what I choose to remember. Even when we have doubts in life, even when we encounter the impossible, it's worth believing in the possibility for wholeness and happiness. It's worth believing in hope. As a little girl, my parents raised me to believe that good could prevail no matter what. They often said to me, Allison, even in the most tragic of circumstances, good can be found. Now, fortunately, I took this to heart. It was challenged at age 17 when I read a newspaper headline, "Fire consumes 2-year-old baby playing in the closet." The story went on to say that this little boy was alone playing with a Bic lighter. Within seconds, he was engulfed by fire. Doctors at the local hospital said, his burns are so extensive, we don't think he will survive. For years, I carried the memory of that little boy. I wanted to trust he could be okay, but my deeply held belief had been so badly shaken, I thought, my parents must be wrong. There is no good that can come from this. Who would have ever predicted that 15 years later, I too would be so badly burned? But as you can see, I made a full recovery. Now, in response to the outpouring of love and support I received, I created a camp for teenagers with severe burn injuries, the Roger Pepper Adventure Camps, named after the man who saved my life. Every year we take these kids skiing, snowboarding, ice climbing, rock climbing, dog sledding. Even Boris is there sometimes. I wish you could meet one extraordinary young man from the camps named CJ. You'd see he's burned head to toe. He has no fingers, just one knuckle, and this very charismatic smile. Year after year, he's the guy who'd throw a party for everybody. He'd bring the music, he brought the snacks. He had such a quiet self-assuredness, you quickly forgot he was burned. His love just burst out of his body. One day, I was on the phone with CJ. I said, CJ, we've been friends for years, and I never asked you how you were burned. And in his gentle voice, he said, oh, yeah. Did you ever hear about the baby with the Bic lighter? Amazing. Pain and joy exist side by side. CJ will never get his fingers back. Roger lost the love of his life. I will always remember burning alive. Certain pain never totally goes away. But instead of resisting that pain, we can pour our love and kindness into it. The line that divides a life of bitterness and a life of sweetness is nearly imperceptible. Sometimes we don't remember that there's a choice to focus on our joy, to build it and nourish it alongside any pain we feel. Our happiness is born in our ability to see all that is beautiful and good, and all that is painful and unfair, and to still choose compassion, kindness, and love anyway. Listen, we can trust this process of life. Everything we go through has a job it can do on our being. Anger chips off the hard edges. Grief and sorrow buffs and shines our spirit and humbles us in the most beautiful way. Whatever pain or struggle or injustice you may face in your life, know that you are stronger. Every day, in every breathing moment, seek to find the good. It's always there. Search with ferocity. Have an unbending belief. My comrades, power of the human spirit, of your spirit, is incredible. May each of you forever shine like the sun. Thank you. Thank you. And thank you to everyone who's tuning in remotely. Really grateful you are all are here. I have a surprise for you. So before you go, you've seen all of my artwork here today. I brought one of my signed art prints to give away to a winner in the audience. This is called Woman in the Light. And the original is actually a paper painting, little pieces of paper I glued down. So if you're the winner, you're going to have a silver and blue ribbon under your seat. So you might have to, look down. You might have to stand up, but if you look down underneath, you'll see. And if it's you, please raise your hand and come on up. And if you have an empty seat next to you, you have a second chance of winning. Silver and blue. We have a winner. Oh, come on up. Great. Awesome. Congratulations. You're welcome. You're welcome. Thank you, everybody. Have a beautiful day. Thank you for helping me with this.
Amazing.